Hey, Hope Quest family, Troy and Melissa here, and we are so grateful that you joined us today. And we're going to talk about something that, gosh, I've always been intrigued by, maybe a little jealous of, maybe not. You guys will understand when we unpack this. But the bottom line is you do something every year. You do it personally, but you also do it with your Journey 2. And Journey is our support and growth groups for wives and women who are in a relationship with guys like me, guys who struggle with sex addiction. And that Journey 2 book, which is really a growth group.
Right.
Y'all take a time where y'all do a fast for 90 days, which, I've never done a fast for that long. I guess I have. I have. So anyway, talk to us real quick about number one. What is the purpose of this fast? What's it? Or just describe the fast for starters. Let's start there.
So when men come into recovery from sexual addiction, one of the things that they do is fast from sex for 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of being to kind of counteract that belief, that core belief that sex is my greatest need.
Yep. And to kind of just kind of reset your body. There's a lot of biological things and a lot of neurochemical things, and just an opportunity to kind of reset.
Absolutely. And so when women get to a certain point in their journey, wives get to a certain point of their journey of their own healing, they've grieved. For me, one of the big challenges of our recovery is I didn't necessarily get addiction. Why couldn't you just say no?
Right.
Right. Why couldn't you just say, oh, I'm not going to do that because, that would hurt my wife.
Right. Or I love my wife so much, I'm just going to stop doing this thing.
Right, exactly. So, in my own personal journey, God led me to this place of understanding that many of us, whether it's sex or shopping or food, we have strategies we cope with, things that we deal with our negative emotions with, things that we turn to often to find some sense of relief or feeling of competency or a coping strategy, an idol, if we use biblical language, something we elevate. And so as I was writing the Journey 2 curriculum and doing this own journey for myself, I thought, well, if Troy fasted for 90 days from sex in his early recovery, what is something that I could fast from that I generally turn to or use to cope with my hard emotions or negative feelings? And so the first 90-day fast I ever did was from sugar.
And I remember that.
That about killed me. At the time our kids were small. I was using sugar a lot for energy. In my own family of origin, that's the way Mom nurtured us. Sweet, yummy brownies and so forth.
Come home from school and there's cookies, fresh baked. Yeah.
Right. So it was really instructive for me because, I had a slip during that time. I was trucking along, and one day I walked in an office and just out of habit put a peppermint in my mouth. I was like, oh no, I'm not supposed to have sugar. And so that was really instructive.
What? Just out of curiosity, what did that teach you? What did that show you? That peppermint.
It showed me that sometimes you can be tootling along through life with no intention to break a commitment, and it just happened.
Yeah.
And the other thing that my first fast taught me was that I really was more dependent than I knew. How much I missed it, the cravings that I had. My instinct when I felt, sad or overwhelmed was to head to the kitchen. I found myself so many times in the kitchen wondering, okay, no.
All of a sudden you're there and you're like looking around going, uh-oh.
No. Right, exactly. So it was really powerful for me. And so I wrote it into the curriculum.
Gotcha.
And so for our ladies who are working on their own growth, they fast from a coping strategy for 90 days. Usually about this time of year.
Okay. So again, just to kind of clarify what we're talking about here, this what I'm going to call a journey fast is a time of focused surrender that involves a coping strategy. And if I could say it this way, it involves kind of letting go of something that may be getting in the way of your intimacy and relationship with God.
Right, absolutely.
A way that you're coping and it's getting in the way. So with that in mind, talk to us a little bit more about what is the purpose of this journey fast? What are the things that happen as a result of, or why are we doing this?
So I think two things.
Okay.
I think, obviously all fasts are about making and creating space for God, right? Denying myself or intentionally adding time or space into my life that I would use normally on something else to give to God, right? To deepen my relationship with Him and grow in intimacy with Him. And so obviously that is one purpose of this fast. I think one of the distinctives about this fast is another goal is that it's to help us as wives have a sense of how hard it can be to let go of something that you've been using to survive, even if it's a very unhealthy, sinful way of surviving, or to meet emotional needs apart from God or your spouse. And so hopefully that builds empathy and understanding, a little insight into what it's like to be in your head. And because on this journey, if both of us are working in recovery, we have to be able to partner with each other.
Right, exactly.
And so understanding what's happening, being able to have an experiential understanding rather than just a head understanding. Just like us wives would really love for you guys to understand our pain.
Yes.
And what it's like to be in our shoes.
And to be betrayed.
Exactly. Yeah. And how devastating that is. I think it's helpful for you to if I can experience at some level, certainly maybe not to the degree you have, but at some level, what it's like to be you.
Right. And, I really like, because I agree, fasting, oftentimes we see fasting as a tool to get God to do what we want Him to do, or this way in which somehow if we fast, God will give us what we're asking for. But really, fasting from Bible times on is about creating space and opportunity in our hearts and lives for us to draw closer to God and be more connected to God and more dependent upon God. And that certainly is a benefit of this particular journey fast. But I'm really encouraged and want to talk a little bit more about this second purpose, because it does build understanding. Here we are, all of us, whatever the case may be, all of us have coping strategies that we use really in place of or instead of trusting in God and depending upon God and turning to Him and letting our intimate relationship with Him be the place in which we find comfort or hope or in the face of fear or anxiety. And so the reality is, as we identify those coping strategies and as we surrender them to God and allow God then to show us that He is sufficient, that He is adequate, there's this benefit that comes where I recognize, or where you recognize. So talk a little bit more about that whole idea of understanding and empathy that comes with this, because so often in marriages impacted by addiction, there's this, it's you versus me. It's, I don't love you, you don't trust me.
Right.
There's this conflict around not understanding one another's perspectives.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that I would say is, for me, just empathy-wise for you. I mean, I naturally have a lot of compassion and empathy.
Yes, you do.
So it's not hard for me to have compassion for the struggle. It's not hard for me to understand, okay, this really isn't personal.
Right.
Like, your sexual addiction isn't about my inadequacy or my failure. It's about a strategy you learned a long time ago to cope with difficult emotions or to feel competent, right? So if I'm going to turn that around to my own life and say, is there anything in my life that I use that way? Definitely for me, sugar was one, right? Sugar, sweets, those kinds of things, because they had not only physical impact on my body, but emotional, right? And so that understanding the pull and the weight
Yes.
of that in my
Yeah.
life,
I love that.
right, helped me understand, me, and also some of the things that we talked about relationally. Like if I don't care of myself physically, even though the sugar is my problem and it's not, quote, sinful,
Right.
if I don't take care of myself, I can die early, get diseases that impact our relationship. And so just understanding that all of our coping impacts relationship one
Yes.
way or another,
And-
whether I'm not turning to God
Right.
or I'm not leaning into you.
And I love that. I love, our coping strategies impact relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, and oftentimes both our relationship with God and our closest, most intimate
Right.
relationships, our coping strategies negatively impact relationships. And so
Absolutely.
this fast is an opportunity to surrender those coping strategies. There's at least one of those coping strategies. So let me ask you this question. Two questions. Number one, what are you fasting from this year?
So this year I am fasting from basically technology that's not work related.
Okay.
So I'm not playing Words with Friends Without Friends, which is my go-to
Yes.
decompression. I love word games. They help me get into different headspace. But I'm fasting from that and perusing Cabins, which is my other drug of choice.
Right.
When I want to think about a happy place. So I'm just basically not spending time on technology.
Right.
Which creates more space for self-care, exercise, creates more space for time with God,
Right.
creates more space for you.
Right.
So over the years I've done lots of things, and spouse, very, very often people fast from social media, from TV, from caffeine, from sugar.
I remember caffeine one year for
Yes.
you, and that wasn't very fun.
That wasn't very fun either.
So what would you say is the biggest benefit to you personally, in a nutshell, the one biggest benefit for you personally that's come from these fasts?
So I think my first fast, certainly the biggest benefit was being able to get in your shoes,
Okay.
and understand the power of addiction, and my own weakness in it, my own powerlessness in moments.
To manage your coping strategy.
Right, to manage my coping strategy. Over the years, I think what's come from those things is every year I give God an opportunity to speak into my life, is for Him to do this ongoing transformative process in me, and to remind me, and we have feet of clay, we don't learn a lesson just once, right? It washes over us again and again. Oh yeah, I'm spending way too much time on technology. I'm neglecting you, I'm neglecting him, I'm neglecting myself.
Right.
And so over the year, every year when I do a fast, it's a new time to be intentional and focus on my relationship with God, on my relationship with others. And I think that's healthy for all of us, to have a season of contemplation, a season of restricting something that may not have reached sinful proportions in our life, but it certainly gets in the way of intimacy.
Yeah, and I go back to kind of that definition or description I gave earlier. It's a time of focused surrender involving a coping strategy, and that focus and that surrender to say, you know what, I've depended upon this. And again, caffeine isn't necessarily sinful. Sugar isn't necessarily sinful. Word games on the computer, it's not sinful. But there are a lot of things in our lives that aren't overtly sinful that get in the way of intimacy and that impede our ability to connect with God and to one another, and to be able to surrender that and focus on relationship is a beautiful gift. And
absolutely,
sweetheart, I appreciate. I've enjoyed. How far are we into the fast? Couple of weeks.
Couple weeks.
Yeah, I've enjoyed our extra time together. I really, really have. And here's what we want to just encourage you to do. And I'm going to come back one last word of wisdom from you. But what about you? What are your coping strategies? And what might God say to you if you were to listen and say, God, I want to surrender a coping strategy to you. And you know what? Maybe 90 days is too much. Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 30 days. But what would it look like if you were to take one of the ways in which you cope and you manage difficult emotions or times of anxiety or fear or just challenging days, what would it look like if you took a time of focused surrender involving that coping strategy and really allowed God to work in your heart and life around that and really just focus on Him and other important relationships in your life? So I just want to encourage you. Maybe even you could make a comment below or shoot us a note saying what it is that you might be willing to surrender. And again, 5 days, a week, 10 days, 30 days, it doesn't have to be 90 days. Just start and give God an opportunity to meet you as you surrender this thing that you've been using. So sweetheart, one last thing that you'd like them to know. If you could say one thing, one sentence about this whole journey fast and this whole opportunity for surrender and focus on relationships, what would you say?
I would say it is worth investing in relationships with God and with others and with ourselves. And if we're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. We're grateful for you. You've been subscribing to the channel below. You've been liking these videos. You've been asking us to add you to our email list, and we're incredibly grateful for that. So please do all of the above. Pray for us. Pray for the HopeQuest team. Some other exciting things going on. Pray for 2020 Hope, and know that we are grateful for you, and we'll see you next week.